There you go.
That was great, Eric. Yeah, that's of course 16-year-old Lucy Baines Johnson was Steve
McQueen, right?
McQueen, the famous actor in Beverly Hills during her father's presidential campaign. It was like Young People for Johnson, and she just jumped out on the dance floor, Lucy, at 16. With it rocked the world. You know, it was called the Lucy Watusi. It was just essentially the basic Watusi, but they just put her name onto it. Thanks, Hal. Yeah, that was fun. That was fun. The Lucy Watusi. Wow.
Okay, well, so we are back, and this is not a Baldwin episode, thankfully. And we have, holy cow, we have content on content on content on content. You told me about this for a while and said, yeah, he's been with a lot of ladies, da. And I'm like, yeah, he's been with a few women. Folks, you have no freaking idea of how long this has taken to go through these photos and to go through all this stuff. It's like, to call him a womanizer would be kind of like calling the gymnastic coach of the women's Olympic team a serial toucher. Mm-hmm. I mean, the degree, I cannot even express how.
Yeah, he made a lot of comments about Kennedy being a piker.
Yeah. And just to get a slight overview, here you go, folks. Here's for today. Here we go. That's what we're choosing from. Got a little bit to cover here. So we are definitely not going to fool around.
There's a lot of stuff. I mean, again, there's going to be four. Like I said to Eric, we're going to have 4 episodes on LBJ. Not all 4 about this. This will be one. One's going to be about the assassination. 2 is going to be about Vietnam. And the 4th one will be about Robert Kennedy. But this is the Ladies of LBJ. Yeah,
and it's already turned into 4. And this one, I'm hoping we can get into 1. We can't even cover all of it. There's just too much.
There's too many women. Staggering. There's too many women. Well, let me just say this, because this is a lot of famous men, a lot of powerful men. I mean, even JFK, they used escorts. But that's not what LBJ did. LBJ, I don't think, ever used an escort. These were wives and very famous women that he had sex and affairs with and dalliances over long periods of time. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, and these go all the way back. I don't know. You'll have to obviously guide me, but I think one of the earliest is
Alice Glass. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that goes back into the early 30s. Alice Glass was a 5'11" independent Viking-looking woman from Texas who was way ahead of her time. There she is. She refused to get married, refused to have children. She had a series of wealthy paramours. One of them was named Marsh, who built her an estate called Longlia in Virginia, where she copied the estates of Europe and hand decorated it, brought in masons, just a sprawling Virginia estate. And the guy Marsh was madly in love with her. She refused to marry him. And she was a incredibly brilliant woman who went to Europe a number of times and started to help people escape from Germany, sponsoring different pianists and things like that. And eventually, one of the pianists that she helped sponsor needed to get a visa, and that's where a young LBJ comes in. LBJ, I think, was 29 and she was 26, but Marsh was like 50, almost a billionaire by today's standards. But LBJ and her fell madly in love, and they were almost, going to get married and leave both their LBJ obviously with Lady Bird, and her with Marsh. She wasn't technically married to Marsh, but this was probably one of the heaviest affairs LBJ ever had is with her. And he wanted her and she wanted him, and they would have secret meetings at the estate itself while he was there repeatedly. So,
okay. So now, where do we go from there? Do we go with his parents? Do we go with
well,
him?
yeah, let's just show the other women of his life. This is not all paramours. These are different women in his life. He was raised by women. His father was an alcoholic, but his father was a Texas state senator, Sam Johnson. That's him on the left, and that's the mother on the right. And she was a school teacher, taught English. Apparently, a very strict woman. They lived like, you know, I want to say a middle class life in the Texas hills. And Johnson loved his mother madly. He had all kinds of crazy dreams about his mother, you know, and the father and him did not get along so well. That's the mother there. Yeah. Years later. Right. Yeah. She was with him throughout his career, and the father was pretty strict, but like I said, was not home all the time. He was up in Austin in the state Senate.
And that's mom there.
That's mom. Yeah. Yeah. He had words for her that were so Freudian, you know, you're sexy, hot, gorgeous, you know, just stuff you would never say about your mother. I mean, just all kinds of things. You thought it was his wife, but it wasn't. It was his mother, Mrs. Johnson. I think it was Rebecca.
Right. And he also had some sisters, right?
Oh, that's Josepha in the middle, right? That's the middle one. She was the wild one. That's his brother on the left, two other sisters, second from the left and on the right. But the middle one was like the female version of him. She was a drinker. She was a partier. She was a philanderer. And she eventually ends up dead in a strange situation. Oh, yeah, with Mac Wallace. Yeah. Dude, this is so crazy. Mac Wallace is having an affair with Josepha, and he comes to the golf course where the golf pro is having an affair with her at the same time, and he shoots him in the head and kills him in the golf course and goes on trial for murder. I mean, it's just blatant, out and out murder. And he gets off, and he becomes a part of the Johnson machine. Johnson gets him off in the trial, and he is acquitted of just straight up smoking gun murder. And he becomes a muscle guy for Johnson for many years, doing his bidding. There he is on the left. He becomes one of Johnson's men, quote unquote, who did a lot of muscle work for Johnson, Mac Wallace. So Josepha apparently may at one point have been a high call girl, escort girl, because Johnson kept having to bail her out of trouble, and she was always into something that I don't know who that is. Is that some later photo of one of them? I think you're muted over there, Eric.
Don't know what happened. Sorry, that's Josepha.
Yeah. Oh, at the end. Okay, that's Josepha?
That's her?
Well, that's weird because she died at 49, so I don't know what year that is. But anyway, so she apparently dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. Then they changed it to a heart attack. There was no autopsy, and nobody ever examined the body. And a lot of people believe to this day that she was silenced by the Johnson men because she wouldn't shut up and was talking too much about his, and knew all his business stuff, his illegal businesses in Texas.
All right.
So he may have had his own sister killed. Is a lot of literature about that.
Now they're saying we're both muted. Are we still muted? Come on.
No,
guys.
no, we're both good. We're good.
All right. Dan Davis, check your volume. Everybody else, let us know if we're muted. But as far as I know, we're still fine. Who is next? I mean, this is a long list, so I got to depend on you.
Let me see who is next. I think I don't know if you have a picture of her, the Davis girl. Like, okay, let me just say that I don't know if I have a picture of Davis, but what Johnson would do when he was in college was he would find the wealthiest fathers of whoever daughter it was that he was going to college, and he would ask them, he would go out with them for like 1 or 2 times and literally go to the father and say, I want to marry your daughter. And most of the fathers said, are you kidding? You come from the Johnson family. You're a bunch of scallywags. And they would say no. But he didn't stop. It didn't even faze him. He would just go from one daughter, it didn't matter what they looked like, until he ended up, no, absolutely meaningless. It was all about the father having money. And he said this to people. He bragged about it to his brother. His own brother backed him up. And that's where the legend of Jumbo begins, is when he's in college, because he begins to take Jumbo out for some air. And his brother verified this in the numerous memoirs, and so have others. I mean, he would take Jumbo out, and Jumbo, yeah, this, if you could back up to the previous photo of the men who were his aides, if you could show these guys, there was another photo of them in the office. These guys, okay. There's Jack Valente, there's Walter Jenkins, there is Bill Moyer somewhere in there. So Johnson would make these guys swim in the pool in the White House. And he would get out of the pool and he'd make them come out without their bathing suits so he can examine their penises. And he would say to them, literally, you call those penises, this is a penis. And he would show them Jumbo, which was his penis. And Jumbo was legendary. He would take it out in the House of Representatives men's room. He would take it out in the White House. He would take it out in the swimming pool. And he would taunt these guys. It was a way of leveling the playing field psychologically for Johnson, according to psychiatrists, because he felt inferior to a lot of these educated men, who many of them were closeted gay men, oddly enough. I think Valente was closeted. Actually, Walter Jenkins, closeted gay man who later gets arrested. So Johnson was surrounded by a lot of strange guys who were beholden to him, and he treated them like shit. I mean, absolutely. At one point, he used Jack Valente as a footstool in a meeting. He didn't have a footstool. He was sitting in an easy chair. He was sitting in an easy chair, and he told Valente to get over. And Valente got down on all fours, and Johnson put his legs up for the meeting, and Valente served as his footstool.
Good Lord. And then there's your...
Okay, there's Walter Jenkins. Yeah, Walter Jenkins was the closest thing Johnson had to a chief of staff, married, 5 or 7 kids. And a couple of weeks before the election against, yes, Jenkins, a couple of weeks before the election against Barry Goldwater, Walter Jenkins went 2 blocks from the White House, went to the YMCA, and performed fellatio on a 60-year-old Polish war veteran in a pay toilet, and was arrested by the FBI, who had staked out this YMCA, not for him, but because of just an inordinate amount of gay activity in the bathroom of this YMCA, which was 2 blocks from the White House. So Walter Jenkins gets arrested 2 weeks before the election, and J. Edgar Hoover calls up LBJ, who is completely floored by this, and he can't believe this has happened. He blames Barry Goldwater for doing this, and Barry Goldwater has nothing to do with this. And he starts arguing, Johnson does, with J. Edgar Hoover, who, of course, himself is a closeted gay, cross-dressing man, whatever you want to make of that. So he tells LBJ, that he tells Hoover that this can't possibly be true. And reluctantly, Hoover tells him that they had arrested Jenkins 3 years before and didn't have the heart to tell Johnson in the same bathroom doing the same thing. And Johnson goes, don't you vet these guys? And he says, yeah. And he tells Hoover to come over to the office. Hoover comes over to the Oval Office. And there's audio tape of this. There's fascinating audio tape of Johnson asking Hoover how he identifies a gay man. And if you really want to hear it,
which is some comedy.
Have you heard those?
I haven't. You know what? We have to find that and put it on Locals.
Dude, that is a great tape. That is just a great tape. And
yeah.
Johnson, I mean, knows he's secretly recording it. He also knows about Hoover, that he's known Hoover for years. And he's just going, well, how do you know, J. Edgar? I mean, is it? And Hoover goes, well, sometimes the way they walk, you know, their wrist. And he just goes and he starts doing it in the Oval Office, mimicking what he believes is an effeminate gay man in 1964. Anyway, so Walter Jenkins has to resign. and he gives the job to Lady Bird to deal with Walter Jenkins because he can't even look at him. He's just so out of it and so angry, Johnson, that he completely believes. Years later, he would say to Bill Moyers that this had to be a setup by Barry Coldwater, and he just can't get his mind around it. So I put in Walter Jenkins.
I found this picture related to it as well. I don't know if that was the exact same time, but it was like while the controversy was going on.
Oh, that looks a little earlier by those phones. I don't think this is about that time. This looks much earlier. But anyway, let's see what else we have in the hopper there.
I promise there's plenty.
Okay.
So Jenkins is up.
Jenkins is out. Jenkins is out.
Next,
Bill Moyers and Goodwin, Richard Goodwin, who is a speechwriter for JFK. Richard Goodwin and Bill Moyers get together, and they're losing their minds, and they just can't work with Johnson anymore. Bill Moyers has known him longer. Goodwin, I came over from the JFK administration as a speechwriter. And he says, I'm going to resign. I have an offer at Wellesley College. I forget which college, or Oberlin or something. And he says, they're going to hire me as a history professor. I got to get out of here. This place is nuts. So Bill Moyers says, they're never going to let you out. He's never going to let you out. So he gets a call on the phone 2 days later, and it's LBJ. And he says, come in here. And he says, what's this I hear about you resigning? He says, oh, well, you know, I just got a job at a college. I mean, it's not really resigning. I just have, you know, I want to move on with my life. And he says, I signed your orders today. And he goes, what orders? The orders for you to be sent to South Vietnam. And he goes, what? He goes, yes, I expect you to serve well. You'll be in the 59th Division of Da Nang. And he tells him the division. And he just starts freaking out. He starts having a heart attack, Goodwin. And he says, well, you know, nobody leaves me, and you're going to have to serve your country. You're not going to go to a college and become some egg-headed professor. So good luck in Vietnam. He almost starts crying, begging Johnson to rescind the order, which he does. And he says, I'll see you tomorrow. Now get to work, you piece of crap. And he leaves and goes back and tells Moyers, we're never getting out of here alive. So the two of them separately decide to go to two separate psychiatrists in Washington, D.C. and tell them, without naming who the guy they're talking about is, the characteristic symptoms of their boss, of what they perceive to be his symptoms, and find out what the diagnosis is from the #1 and #2 psychiatrists in Washington, D.C., without telling them it's Johnson. So they both come back a week later, and they meet up, and he says to Moyers, what do you have? And he says, well, the guy said he's a megalomaniac, who's an alcoholic, who's a sex addict, who's bipolar. And Goodwin, his jaw drops open, because that's exactly what the guy told him, the same thing. So they're both working for a megalomaniacal, sex-addicted, alcoholic, bipolar madman, and they can't get out. And it turns out that LBJ literally drinks 2 quarts of Cutty Sark a night. This is his level of alcoholic drinking.
This sounds like McAfee. McAfee.
That I don't know.
You know, he drank, I think, 1.5 bottles of Jack Daniels every day.
Right. He would then take his clothes off and run around the White House yelling the N-word at the mostly black staff. Okay. And this is in another memoir written by the head butler in the White House, who talked about Johnson being drunk every night, yelling the N-word, and, you know, taking Jumbo out when Jumbo shouldn't have been out at night. Now, he has a pool of secretaries. If we can show you that, maybe you can find that photo. There was a secretarial room where a few of them were in. He had 8 secretaries, Johnson. Not all at the same time, but there's 4 and 4. I think they're in 2 different rooms.
Well, here's one of the rooms. So
oh yeah, you'll see him. He's just sitting there, right? This is not his office. This is one of the secretary's office. I think that's Juanita Roberts in the lower right-hand corner. That's Vicky McCammon up in the right-hand corner there, one of his main squeezes. He had 8 of them. He had sex with all 8 of them at one point, off and on for years. And they would rotate in and out of his life. He told them how to dress. He told them how to wear their hair. He told them what outfit. He would buy them outfits, give them outfits. I mean, he was a complete control freak about how they looked, and he owned them, literally owned them. Vicky McCammon would end up out in Texas with him. But the main one was, and this is his, Ghislaine Maxwell is the one on the right who would secure him other secretaries. She knew what was going on.
Oh, Juanita?
Yeah, Juanita was the older one. She had been a colonel in the Women's Army Corps, the WACS or something, and she ran the office, but she was also the Maxwell type woman who brought in women that he liked. This is her later, years later, but yeah, she went with him. She came all the way from back in the day with him, and she was the oldest one and also the one who ran the office.
Okay. Crazy. And he didn't he also bring them, let me see, back with him to the ranch?
Yeah, I think that's the one on his left with the striped blouse is Vicky McCammon. That's Lady Bird on his right, and then on the extreme right is another secretary. I forget her name, and the one in the orange I don't think was a secretary, but yeah,
Jenny Thrift. Jenny Thrift, Vicky McCammon, and Marie Femner.
Marie Famer is the one on the right. Yeah, Famer stayed with him for years and years and years. The one in the flowered shirt there. So he had a car on the ranch. Just to get into one of these things that he did. First he had the white Lincoln Continental, right? So in the white Lincoln Continental, he would drive and drink at the same time. And when he had a big white paper cup, and when the cup was running out, he would slow down or stop, put the cup out of the driver's side door and rattle the ice. And a Secret Service man would run up and fill it up with Dewar's. I swear to God, no, this is absolutely true. And then he'd keep drinking and driving on his own ranch. You know what I mean? So one day he had like 5 different women reporters, and he was taking them on a tour of the ranch while drinking Dewar's, you know, and he comes across a bull and a cow mating in the middle of the road, and he starts explaining everything to the horror of these women reporters in incredibly dark detail of what was going on. So you say, well, why would that mean anything? Okay. His top drawer of his desk in the Oval Office, he had a series of bestial porn photos. He was into bestial porn, and he had them in the Oval Office of the White House in the top drawer of his desk. Just so you know, just not talking out of school, documented by numerous books. So when he was out at the ranch, he would drive around drunk on the ranch when he was using the Lincoln Continental. And a lot of the women were in the front seat with him, including his wife. And he would do this stuff right in front of his wife. He'd put his hand under their skirts in the middle seat, and his wife would be sitting in the passenger seat. And he'd make the woman who he wanted to be with, sit next to him, so he could do that while he was driving and drinking. Just so President of the United States, just so you know. With his wife, he apparently loved to humiliate people, including his wife, that he did this stuff to. That's what I was saying. The men who got out of the pool with their shriveled or smaller penises than Jumbo, he ridiculed them so he could have power over them. There was a method to this. That's why he defecated with the door open and had conferences with guys from Harvard who would be outside the bathroom door when it was open, with him sitting on the toilet defecating. That was to humiliate them, not him. That was to have power over them, not to reduce his power, not to embarrass him. They were embarrassed. This was an intentional psychological thing that he did to people, men and women. Did to men and women. It was a type of psyops thing that he did himself.
Well, while he's driving around, didn't he play a stunt with one of his cars?
Well, I was going to get to that. See, one of his cars, if you have, hey, thanks, Winston. Yeah, no, these people are not even in this league. I mean, the Kennedys, this is, you got to understand something. These people had 1 or 2 off. They had some escorts. The Kennedys usually used escorts. And Clinton had this, you know, the fat Jewish girl from Beverly Hills. This is not what this guy was doing. Samantha, you're late. So we're going to have to start over. Okay. So he has this special car. Just want to show you. If you show a picture of the car.
Yeah, I was going to do it right when you told the story so people can see the effect.
So dig this. This is from Joseph Califano. Joseph Califano was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, you know, members of his cabinet. So he had Vicky McCammon. He did this every week when he went out there, but he had Vicky McCammon sitting riding shotgun with him. And then in the back, up on the ledge, it was small, looked like a Studebaker convertible. He had Joseph Califano, but he did it to everybody. So it just happened to be Joseph Califano that weekend. So he would drive this car, and go down a slight incline near the river, right? Johnson Lake, actually. You want to take that back? It wasn't a river. It was Johnson. He named everything after himself. Every single thing on the ranch was Johnson, whatever.
Except his Johnson. No, sorry.
That was called Jumbo, right?
I know.
So
right, come on.
All of a sudden, he would yell, "The brakes are out! The brakes are out!" And the car would race down the hill at like 35 miles an hour into the lake. And then here's the image of it, right, of the car, which was an amphibious car. And what happened with Califano is he got scared and jumped out of the car into the lake. And Johnson was hoping that these people would do that, because then he said to Vicky, "Can you believe what that good old boy did? Couldn't care less about his president, Vicky, trying to save his own ass." And he did that every time with this car to whoever got in that seat in the back. And that was one of his jokes. Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
So, I mean, but this goes all the way back to when he was a kid. Him and his friends would pull into a gas station, which would have a black kid working, pumping gas, right? And they would tell the kid, and they didn't use the word kid, I'm saying kid, but they would tell the kid to check the tire in the trunk, right? Mm-hmm. So the kid would, would open the trunk, and there would be a 12-foot rattler, and the kid would jump out of his skin, and they'd laugh and drive off. This is how he got his jollies,
He's a
just
sport.
so this goes back to when he was a teenager. But the car thing, he did that all the time. And Vicky was like, Vicky, she just thought it was so funny, Vicky, or whoever was sitting with him, Now, at the ranch itself, there was a lot of hijinks, Eric. And I could tell you from the various people who were victimized by him, and I don't know where victimized is correct, but for instance, one weekend they had David Brinkley and his wife show up. And David Brinkley was the co-host of the Huntley Brinkley Report on NBC News. And they were there for a press event. And David Brinkley had to go back to Washington to file his report. He left behind his wife. And a lot of people left behind their wives. They didn't think anything of it. So while his wife was sleeping in the guest room, which this is a standard Johnson operation, did this to everybody, he would come in the middle of the night. He'd pull back the covers and say, this here's your president, honey, shove over. And he'd get into bed with them and have sex with them. Okay, he did this to a lot of people you're going to hear about coming up. But one of the first ones I remember was David Brinkley's wife at the time. This is obviously 65, around that period of time.
Insane. Okay, so to the role of women, I'm taking a guess. Claire Booth Luce is
okay. Well, Claire Booth Luce is one of his mentors, and she's married to Henry Luce. I mean, the publisher and owner of Time Life books and magazine. Claire Booth Luce was CIA, as was the husband, was a CIA person. They were both millionaires, but the reason Claire Booth Luce is important is she tried to talk Johnson out of taking the vice president's job, and Johnson said he had checked the number of VPs who became president, and it was something like 3 out of the last 20 years, and he says, "I'm a gambling man, honey. I like those odds." And that was the first recorded time where Johnson mentioned to someone that he felt he would be president, that a president would die in office, like had happened 3 or 4 times in the past 20, 25 years, or every 20 years. I forget what the reference was mathematically. He had sent out an aide to do the math when he was at the convention. I swear to God, he sent out an aide during the convention in LA when they were asking him to become vice president, what the odds were and what the numbers were of becoming vice president. And the guy came back and said, "It seems to be every 20 years. And he says, "Well, how long's it been?" And he says, 20 years. And he says, "I like those odds. Let's do it."
Oh, man.
Oh, no. Very famous story. And he repeats the story to Claire Booth Luce to explain to her why he's doing it. And this is in the limousine going to the inauguration.
Wow.
And not to mention anything, but he's blind drunk at the inauguration and doesn't even remember it for years. He was just out of his mind drunk. But
wow.
When Kennedy wins the election in 1960, he is at the Adolphus Hotel in Austin, Texas, watching it on TV. And he is depressed because he's now going to become vice president, and he doesn't want to be vice president. And he's just sitting there in a dark room watching the TV, drinking. And his wife says, Nancy Dickerson is here, honey, from CBS News. And he says, all right, let her in. And I don't even know how to explain this. He chases her around the TV like a wild animal, saying I am an uncaged, unleashed animal. And she's running around the TV trying to escape from him to no avail. Now, Nancy Dickerson, I don't know if you have a photo of Nancy Dickerson.
Looking right now. I don't right now.
Nancy Dickerson was one of the first newscasters in television history. And then she had a son named John Dickerson years later, who later became the host of Face the Nation. That's Nancy Dickerson. Yeah.
Let's, folks, I don't have all the photos because honestly, I can't keep up.
Okay.
There's just so many people. Oh my God.
Do you have the shot? Do you have the shot of the general and the blonde and Lady Bird and the limousine and the convertible?
Is there names? I'm trying to.
Well, it's okay. It doesn't matter. There's so many of them. It doesn't matter. But I just want to get to Jerry Whittington. If you can get to Jerry, I think you might have some fun with Jerry, the secretary.
For sure.
Might be a couple of photos of her there. Now, Jerry Whittington. Excuse me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, Jerry Whittington. Oh, there she is. Yeah, Jerry Whittington was the first of the black secretary, the first and only at that point black secretary. He somebody had found her and he called her up and said, "I'd like you to come over." And she said, "It's 11 o'clock at night on a Tuesday." And he says, she thought it was a prank call. She didn't believe it was LBJ calling her. And she had been a secretary somewhere in the government, somewhere else. And somebody found her. Yeah, there she is. And he brought her in. And okay, I don't even know how to explain this, so I'm just going to explain it the best way I can. One of LBJ's methods of procuring these women was to buy them a bathing suit and have them try on the bathing suit in front of him. Okay. So he buys her a bathing suit and takes her to the same White House pool, and he says, "Do you know how to swim?" And she says, "No, I grew up in segregated pools in DC. I never learned how to swim." So with the bathing suit that she puts on that he gets for her, he now is teaching her how to swim in the pool, and that leads to hijinks and other things that happen. But this bathing suit thing was one of his MOs. He would buy them a bathing suit, and I remember going to a Dodger game with Roz Wyman, who was the head of the Democratic Party in California. And that's a young Roz Wyman. She was the youngest and first female city councilwoman in Los Angeles history. And she was the one who brought the Dodgers from Brooklyn to LA. And she was hosting Johnson for the 1960 Democratic Convention here in Los Angeles, and I was at the game with her. We shared a box seat at the Dodger games and in the playoffs. And I told her I was doing a script. Here she is with me. She's sitting next to me. That's Roz Wyman. She's 87 now, and she's revered by Dodger fans and Dodger players who come over and kiss the ring. The mayor comes over. Everybody, Tommy Lasorda when he was alive. Maybe even when he was dead, who knows? But the reality of it is, Roz Wyman, she knew I was writing a miniseries. There's a bobblehead of me, ironically enough. So Roz Wyman, I told her I was doing research on LBJ, and she answered some questions for me. And I was saying, about this bathing suit thing. And I said, I summoned up the courage, because she's pretty harsh. to ask her if he had bought her a bathing suit. She said yes. I was like flabbergasted. You know, so I'm there with an 85-year-old woman at the Dodger playoffs, you know, in the World Series with her.
Right.
And there was a long pause, and I summoned up the courage once again, and I said, did he ask you to try it on? And she said yes. And I went, okay. The conversation ended there, and we went back to the game. But I had my answer. She was, you know, was smiling, of course, because she knew the drill. But the reality of it is, Johnson did this stuff all the time. He had all kinds of methods. These were all, again, these are not people. He was doing this with really professional women, which is a whole different game than all these other people who were womanizers. Oh my God, this is Helen Gahagan Douglas. She was the star of this futuristic movie called She, with Randolph Scott. She had been on Broadway. This was her one of her biggest and probably only movies, but she was a star on Broadway before she came out here. And Helen Gahagan Douglas was married. Her name was Helen Gahagan. She was married to Melvin Douglas, who was a huge Warner Brothers star. That's, I think, Randolph Scott from the movie She. That's not Melvin Douglas.
No.
Right. Okay. Anyway, that's Helen Gahagan on the set of She, the movie. And she became the congresswoman of Hollywood, representing exactly where I am right now. The district that I'm in, she was the representative in 1945. And there's Melvin Douglas. Yeah, there's Melvin Douglas. Huge, hundreds of movies. That's him later on when he was much older. Sure. But he was a leading man in the 30s and 40s. Anyway, so Helen Gahagan Douglas becomes the congresswoman. That's also from She. That's also one of her things. That's She again. Okay, Eric, now you're getting somewhere. Oh, there she is. Yeah, that's it. That's how pretty she was. Yeah, she was beautiful. Anyway, she runs for Congress. She represents my district here, which is now represented by a guy named Adam Schiff.
Shifty.
Yeah, the same. He is my congressman here. I was in New York. When I lived in New York, it was Nadler. So wherever I go, it's Nadler in New York or Schiff here. But anyway, so Helen Gahagan Douglas goes to Washington. She's in her office, and a guy comes in. It's LBJ, and LBJ thinks she's a secretary. And she says, no, I'm the congresswoman from Hollywood. And he knows that. He's just screwing with her. And he takes her to his office. And yeah, that's her again. Yeah, Helen Gahagan. So he then has, he bonds with her. And at the FDR's funeral, FDR dies in 1945, and she's crestfallen. She worships FDR. And he uses that to seduce her in one of his offices. He's also crying, quote unquote. And she's really crying because they're just coming from the funeral in the rotunda of the house. And he takes her to one of his offices and has sex with her on a couch. And FDR is laying in state in the rotunda at the same time. So they become an item where LBJ sleeps over her apartment and literally comes holding her hand into the this is when he was a congressman from Texas, by the way, 1945. He was a 6-term congressman. Landslide Lyndon was his name. He stole an election with a handful of votes when the good old boys down there in Texas. And there's tourists there roped off, and they go, look, this is every day. There's tourists in the house every day. And they go, look, it's Helen Gahagan Douglas. Oh my God. And she's with LBJ, and they're holding hands and kissing. And people are like, what? This is the 1940s. In other words, it was like the equivalent of a guy who exposes himself in a park. You know what I mean, Eric? Mm-hmm. This is a guy who flagrantly did this in public on purpose. He didn't try to hide these affairs. It was almost like, I think his brother or Bill Moyers, one of them said it's like he wanted to be caught. Or George Reedy said it. George Reedy was press secretary, said LBJ told him there was 3 things he loved: alcohol, sunshine, and sex. Those are the only 3 things he loved. Never read a book in his life. John Connolly, who was his campaign manager going all the way back to his congressional races, said LBJ never read a book, an actual book, in his life. Now, this is odd because he had a teacher's degree for a school in Texas, but he never physically read an actual book. He cheated on everything. He cheated on becoming college president, for the student body president. He cheated at the election. He was one of the greatest brown nosers of older men in the history of politics. That was his superpower, was to brown nose older, more powerful men. Some of them were even gay, but that's another story.
Mm. Yeah, in this series, we're going to have to talk about his medal. Not today.
Oh, whenever. No, this is just the women today. We can't get into anything else but the women. Yeah. Got to stay on the women. Yep. Okay, so Hagen Douglas. Yeah, Hagen Douglas is his mistress. She's married to Melvin Douglas. I guess he doesn't care. You know, he's in Hollywood. They have loose morals. Who knows? But none of these people seem to care. They all seem to have husbands. He's got a wife. She knows about all of this. She can completely co-signs all of this stuff and never protests. She goes, that's just LBJ. That's the way he is. You know what I mean? So Lucy Baines gets married in one of the biggest weddings in Washington history. Lucy Baines marries Patrick Nugent. I don't know if you got a photo of that wedding anywhere. How huge. This was watched by 55 million Americans on TV. She's 19 years old. She converts to Catholicism. Just getting back to the family daughters for a moment. Lucy has like a 90-foot train on her dress. The dress designer shows up. She converts to Catholicism. She's got to quit Georgetown University because you can't be married and be in nursing school for reasons that nobody seems to explain. So she marries Patrick Nugent, and I think he was Catholic. I think she had to convert to Catholicism. But the wedding at the time was so huge. And the reason I mentioned the wedding is that she throws, there's the train. I don't know if you could blow that up for the ladies at home. Yeah, I mean, take a look at that. That's pretty interesting what's going on there. At the time, it was like the size of the royal wedding. That's why I want to mention it. History has completely forgotten this particular event. It was on every channel. Everybody in America watched this wedding. And when she throws the bouquet, by the way, all of the bridesmaids were in some kind of pink outfits. They were all like in these really pink dresses. But when she throws the bouquet, and there's a lot of women there, or, you know, ladies who could catch the bouquet, it's caught by her sister, Linda, who was married within a year after catching that bouquet, which I thought was pretty interesting. Linda gets married within a year, and you say, well, what is Linda Bird doing, Eric? You say, you know, what is she doing? Well, Linda Bird goes to a movie, and she sees a guy playing Hank Williams in a movie. And she says to her girlfriend, I'm going to marry that guy. The guy is playing Hank Williams in the movie. And she falls in love with the guy on the screen. And the guy on the screen is George Hamilton. And George Hamilton, in a B movie, is playing Hank Williams. So somehow they get together, and George Hamilton, there's the poster for your cheating heart. A terrible, terrible biopic of Hank Williams. But she loves George Hamilton, who's from Memphis, Tennessee, and a rakish rogue of a man who I've known for a long time. Okay, hold on. Just hold that shot for a second. Go back for a second. Go back to that.
No, that one. That one.
What's that?
Which one?
This one. Okay. In I think in 1965, they had the Oscars in Santa Monica, and George brought Linda Bird Johnson to the Oscars. And he said to me, and I don't want to talk out of school, but he brought in Hollywood's top hair and makeup people, and they worked on her for 6 hours to try to get her as good as they could. And George had some other reasons for dating her, but looks and sexuality were not part of it, because he had dated some real beautiful women. And the two of them began to hang out with Elvis and his dates, and it became like a whole thing where George Hamilton was with her. And yeah, that's about as good as she's ever going to look. This is here in LA. So the weird part of the story is that LBJ falls in love with George Hamilton and wants him to be his son-in-law, right? And George Hamilton has no intention of marrying her. This is all for publicity for his career. He's not going to marry her. And LBJ is convinced that this is going to be his son-in-law. So he tells him to come out to the ranch. And George Hamilton flies out to the ranch in a private jet. And he's picked up at the ranch outside of Austin with LBJ, with the Lincoln Continental convertible, with the Doers and the Scotch. And he takes him hunting. And he gets in the Lincoln and he drives into the woods. And he says, look, there's a bunch of deer. And so George Hamilton, he gives him a rifle. This is George telling me this story. This couple, like 3 years ago. George Hamilton says, LBJ says, look, there's some bucks. Go get them, boy. So he lays down on his stomach. And with the first shot, George Hamilton kills a big buck, shoots him in the head, kills him. And LBJ looks at him and he says, you're some kind of Daniel Boone, ain't you, boy? And it was just the funniest line. I mean, he would tell this story, and LBJ just fell in love with him from him shooting that deer, and says, you're some kind of a Daniel Boone, ain't you, boy? Now, he was from Tennessee. You know, he was not a city slicker at all, George Hamilton. He came from Memphis, and he was like a Yancey Derringer riverboat guy, gambler kind of guy. You know what I mean? But nevertheless, he'd learned how to shoot. And it begins to become a movement that why is George Hamilton not being sent to Vietnam? And it becomes into the press, and they start having protests outside the White House. Yeah, here I don't know, she did something with her hair, but there's George with Linda Bird. Some people think he was trying to avoid going to Vietnam. I don't think so, but that might have been one of the motivations, Eric. George is a fascinating character. He ends up with Imelda Marcos years later in a banking scandal. He may or may not have been a deep state operative. Let me just leave it that way. There's a lot of stuff I learned about George Hamilton since that last interview I did with him, which indicates a guy being in a lot of weird places.
First weird place is connected to you.
Yeah, oddly enough, right? He probably wanted to learn more about me than I mean, I didn't know anything about this when I was going over his house every couple of weeks to interview him here in Century City, and his maid would make us lunch. He had a shoe collection that bordered on Imelda Marcos's level of shoes. He had over 500 pairs of shoes. He took me in a room, showed me 500 pairs of shoes, and I was just, and he wanted to make that vampire movie, a remake of it. So we talked about that.
Are you sure she wasn't going to be a beard? I'm sorry, if I hear shoes like that, I kind of wonder.
I don't know. It's a good question. You know what? Looking back, I don't know. At one point, I thought that. But that being said, she gets married. She marries Chuck Robb, and the thing with George Hamilton comes to an end. She marries Chuck Robb, who later becomes senator and governor of Virginia, right? Or next door. I think it was Virginia.
Could be. Yeah, it's been a while. I don't know.
Right. Okay, so she becomes the first lady of Virginia. He goes off to Vietnam, Chuck Robb, and Chuck Robb sends back these. We can get into it later. But Chuck Robb sends back audio tapes to LBJ from Vietnam. He becomes a captain and literally tells him the war is lost. And LBJ has a complete nervous breakdown that his son-in-law is telling him the truth about what's going on in Vietnam. Late in the 67 or so,
He's still, they're still both around.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
The other one didn't. She got divorced. Lucy Baines Johnson got divorced from that guy and then married a British investment banker, I think, Ian something or other. Lucy. That marriage that she had with Patrick Nugent, I think, lasted about 12 years.
All right. So let's see. Back to Johnson's women. And I'm sure we've got to talk about
who do you got there?
How about Madeline Brown?
Oh my God. We're going to have to get into her later, but let me just go on to Madeline Brown, who was his mistress in Austin. And Madeline Brown gave him a child who Johnson denied was his child, but looked so much like him as the kid, right? As Johnson sitting with his back to the kid. But that kid was such a dead ringer for Johnson that it was hard to deny that was his son. The real link to Madeline Brown is that Johnson comes to her after a party outside of Dallas the night before the assassination and tells her, this is all Clint Murchison's estate, and J. Edgar Hoover was there, and a bunch of other Texas oil guys were there, Murchison being a Texas oil guy. And he allegedly said to Madeline Brown, after tonight, the Kennedys won't be able to kick me around any longer. And the next day, he was assassinated. And Brown believes that was the meeting that sealed the fate of JFK was in that house the night before. And that's Brown. Brown has testified to that and has been filmed talking about that, and was his mistress in Austin when he was in Austin for many, many years, Madeline Brown.
Wow, crazy. How about Princess Margaret?
Okay, now I don't know if he shagged her, but apparently the two of them, this was a state dinner that they had for British royalty, and they were exchanging really ribald sex poems. This was alleged by the dinner guests, nursery rhymes with sexual innuendos to them. And it would be odd for him to let her go. Some of them he never achieved takeoff with, but I think he was trying to get Princess Margaret that night. There was a lot of heavy drinking. A lot of people, said a lot of things went on at that dinner party. There are some that got away. She may have gotten away. I have not heard that he had sex with Princess Margaret.
Not confirmed.
Not confirmed.
I'm just randomly picking on Vicky.
Oh, this is Vicky McCammon. Yeah. Oh, she was stunning. That was one of his younger secretaries, also part of his flock. Great photo of her. And, she was a good old girl. You see her in a lot of the shots. She's wearing like a straw cowboy hat, driving around in a Lincoln with him, drinking, just regular secretarial duties. That's what secretaries did. Oh, there she is. That's her at the wheel. And he's got his wife in the middle. Look at Vicky there. Looking good, Vic. Looking good. There's a couple of girls that got away. Lisa Mitchell got away. He never got Lisa Mitchell, one of the girls he really wanted to get. But Vicky obviously was part of the operation.
Wow. So, yeah, it seems like he's gotten everybody. We passed over somebody you had me pull up before, going back to Helen Douglas.
And, Helen. Oh, yeah, this is Ileana Douglas, who's the granddaughter of Helen Gahagan Douglas. And she got into film by having a relationship with Martin Scorsese. And works all the time. There she is with Marty. Gave her a part in Goodfellas, and the rest, as they say, is Douglas history. Ileana Douglas.
She played a singer in a role too. I forgot the name of it, like Crazy from the Heart or something.
Oh, she's had a long career. I mean, she had a pretty good career. I think she was even in Looking for Mr. Goodbar with Richard Gere. I think she's raped by a serial killer or something. There was one, not Richard Gere. What wasn't Looking for Mr. Goodbar? Did that have Richard Gere in it?
I'm not sure.
Okay, but I think she was the subject of a vicious rape in that movie.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Now, did this one get away?
Okay. Now, I just have to tell you something, because we could put the tapes up on Locals. After the death of her husband, he continues to call her seductively, trying to get her to come to the Oval Office and stay over. The tapes are so sickening, Eric. They're hard to listen to. He would not stop with trying to get Jackie Kennedy back to the White House and have her under his wing. And she was super polite. She would giggle. She's, oh, Mr. President. And, I could be the only woman in America who said they dated two presidents. And she was being flirtatious, But he was nonstop, Eric, nonstop trying to get her. And she, you know, I once went to a book signing party at the Egyptian embassy in New York when she was a book publisher. And she was there, and I was with Ratso, who was a strange-looking guy, me, and another National Lampoon editor. We'd go to these publishing events because we were in the publishing business, ostensibly a National Lampoon. And she was there. She was the host. I mean, it was her party. Some book was coming out. It was her company. And I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was so, there was something in person that is not captured in photos of Jackie Kennedy. When you see her in person, and she kept looking at us because we looked like we're going to kill her probably. She was probably terrified of Ratso. But she had something, that magical thing that you only see in person that you can't capture in a photo. And I, for one, could not take my eyes off her. And then, of course, the police threw us out. But that's another story.
she noticed. So okay.
She notified security immediately. I'm kidding about that. But ravishing beauty, absolutely ravishing.
All right. Well, to clarify, essentially, very few got away, and he pretty much had the press pool. He had all the secretaries. How about another legendary reporter, Helen Thomas?
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God. No, he specifically said in his memoirs that he did not have sex with Helen Thomas. I think he went out of his way to mention that. And not that Helen Thomas would. Oh, Jesus. Helen Thomas for a scoop. Now, let me just backtrack a little bit, because Doris Kearns Goodwin, who did sleep with him, who wrote a biography, a very good biography about LBJ. When she was 24, she was going to Harvard. Here's Doris Kearns. She later marries Richard Goodwin, who's a total alcoholic, out of his mind. But she writes about Lincoln's cabinet years later. She writes a lot of history books. This is her first book. And yeah, here she is. She had the "move over, honey, this is your president speaking" happen to her at the ranch. And he got her at the very end of his term, when he was retiring, to come out to the ranch to write this biography about him. He wanted her to write his memoir, but she wrote a book called, I think it's called LBJ and the American Dream or something. And there's a lot of psychological stuff in the book. She was 24 years old at the time. And that's how she made her bones in the business, by sleeping with LBJ at the ranch. Anytime she was asked about it on TV, by the way, she would just giggle. I guess is, some kind of disclosure.
Well, maybe they needed to ask her, did you try on a bathing suit?
You know, my source is Legs McNeil, who was my roommate in Valley Village, and Legs knew her very well. Legs McNeil, of course, wrote the book Please Kill Me, and don't even ask why. We had a big house together in Valley Village, out here in LA. A lot of weird stuff went on in that house. But one thing Legs told me was he knew Doris pretty well, and she told him the whole story of sleeping with LBJ. So just so I could explain the source of where I got the story from.
All right. Well, we obviously didn't cover everybody, but
who's missing from that group? Do you see anybody up there? Or?
I don't know who's missing from here. I know you said you haven't even sent me everybody, so there's got to be more out there too. But we've got a good swath. I mean, people have an idea. We lived up to the billing.
Right.
He's been with a couple of folks.
Right.
And we have 3 more episodes coming up that you never know. Other names might slip in. Definitely other adventures.
Right. Well, we're going to try to focus on the politics of LBJ and the murders of LBJ and some of the other things of LBJ. But I thought this would be a good entry into the series to get
a little romance, pre-val. No.
Some romance, some dalliances. I mean, again, I don't know how his wife, she wrote a memoir. And in the memoir, she said, yes, I was aware of all this. At one point, I never heard that. He did have a heart attack. He drank himself to death, which we'll get into in the final episode. But one time she walked in on him in the Oval Office in his little alcove there off of the Oval Office, and caught him with one of his secretaries, Lady Bird. And he flipped out, started yelling at the Secret Service, and they installed a buzzer system in their residence. So when she left the residence, the Secret Service agent would push the buzzer and he would hear it. The other agents would hear it and say whatever her code name was on the move, you know, and then the buzzer would go off in the Oval Office. So he did have that electronically installed to prevent further embarrassments with his wife. But boy, did he embarrass her on so many occasions. He would flagrantly put his hand under skirts right in front of her. And there's one photo with a blonde reporter from the Associated Press where they're sitting in the back of the limousine. He's got his arm around her. You know, I mean, it's just really, really crazy.
All right, keeps on giving. One more. Yolanda
Boozer.
Boozer.
That's Boozer, I think her name was. Yvonne. Yeah.
Yolanda.
What was her name? Yolanda Boozer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another one of the secretaries. Yeah. That's kind of their wing where they hung out. They're like their bullpen.
All right. What a dynamically outstanding person.
Yeah.
Not. Okay. So what do we have next? Baldwin Friday, or do we have anything?
Well, right now there's no Baldwin on the horizon because he's not doing anything.
Well, he did respond to ask for dismissal on.
Is that true? I didn't hear that.
Yeah. It just came out today on the suit. I'm waiting for other things to come in too as well, but Mamie Mitchell. He and the producers. Yeah, he and the producers have responded to try to get the case dismissed. So I've got the stuff.
Wait. What does Mamie Mitchell have to do with it?
She's the one they sued. The 911 operator, 911 caller. Remember,
right. So what does this have to do with Baldwin, though?
Baldwin and the producers have responded to the suit.
Baldwin and the producers. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Anyway,
as an entity you're talking about.
Yeah, we'll get into it. Possibly Friday, possibly next week. I don't know yet. If we'll find something, we'll definitely figure out Friday in some ways. In the interim, folks, definitely will help a ton.
Well, you think it would help a ton if they subscribed, Eric?
Definitely, because I don't even know what's coming next. So the best way to know is to subscribe.
I don't have time. I got to keep reading all these books. If you guys can send me some money to buy more books, Eric is running the ship. I'm just a guy I'm in the back reading all this crap, and I need the funding to continue the operation. Subscriptions really help, though, right, Eric?
Subscriptions help. Locals helps a ton. We try to put different things in locals. There's some risque shots. I don't know if I'm going to put that in locals or not. I'm not sure.
What? Of what? Jackie Kennedy?
Yeah. I mean, they're probably historical, but I'm kind of like, I don't want to
those have been published. I don't, it's not like.
I'm trying to think if there's a way to make it private or not, so that way people can be warned and not just go in the.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I have a first 2 hours of my LBJ miniseries that I'm willing to put up on locals for subscribers. I think they'll enjoy it. It's a 10-hour miniseries. The first 2 hours we could put up there for people to follow along on how he got to where he was in the miniseries. So I think it opens with him becoming president, and there's a lot of flashbacks. I mean, he was about to be indicted and removed from the ticket. Not only was he going to be removed from the ticket by the Kennedys, potentially, but that was because of the Bobby Baker scandal, and Life magazine was going to publish that week of the scandal against LBJ, but the killing of somebody took that off the cover of Life magazine, and the people testifying against LBJ stopped their testimony in midstream in the Congress behind closed doors when the word came in that LBJ had become president in the middle of that testimony. The guy stood up and said, took all his documents of bribery and corruption against LBJ and said, it's one thing, the quote was, it's one thing to testify against the vice president. It's another to take on a president. Have a good day, gentlemen.
Figures.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll get into that a little bit more later.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. Okay. Another way, this is a new way to support Mark.
What?
If you guys like tea.
Who doesn't like tea?
We got a good offer code for that. And this is some cool anime tea. It's like the fiddly tea. You know, they have this.
You mean fiddly? What's fiddly tea?
Well, you know that like tea can be taken to different levels. You can take an Earl Grey, throw a bag in a cup, and
Right.
dump water on it.
Right.
This is the stuff that is like loose, and they actually sell a.
Oh, you need that ball. You need the metal ball.
Well, you could do with a metal ball, but they also have this really cool thing where you could just brew it inside of the container and then just put it over the cup, and it drains in because it's loose space tea.
That's fascinating.
And
But what
different
about the
temp-
swag that's really sexy down below? What about that swag? The dress up
well,
swag.
we'll look right below the video right now.
And there's
You
stuff
should,
down there right now.
yeah, there should be
Okay.
T-shirts, hoodies. There's a really cool cat or hat, like a ski hat,
Right.
beanie. I don't know what you call it, but
There's
I
no
like that.
there's no lingerie, is there?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
No,
All right.
no jumbo. We'll get we'll get branded
It doesn't have to be
jumbo.
jumbo, but it could be lingerie for ladies. I mean, it's, they do wear lingerie. That would be fun.
There you go. There you go.
So we're both on Venmo. You can PayPal us, Venmo us. You can
PayPal.
buy my book, Rehab Nation, which is down below. I think it's a whopping $3 on the digital copy on Amazon. Whatever else is down there, I'm not sure. But the clothing looks really, really nice, Eric.
Yeah, the clothing is awesome, and really, I mean, just subscribing and share. Just share this with somebody if you think they'll like.
Oh,
this,
sharing it is that's what Viva told you to say. Viva's right. If you tell them to share it, maybe they'll share it.
Yeah, please.
I mean, nobody knows this stuff about LBJ. This has taken me like 10 years to assemble all this crap. You know what I mean? I have to read. You got to see how many Caro books I've got back there. They're all 500 pages. You know what I mean?
The Caro you've read.
That's just the Caro books. I mean, but those are the most accurate. The Robert Caro foursome, which I strongly recommend that people read. I also strongly recommend the RFK Jr. Fauci book, which is unbelievably great. It's going to take me the rest of my life to get through that because that's about 400 pages or 500 pages. So you may want to go Audible on that, Eric, on the Fauci book.
Yeah,
strongly recommend that.
All right. So all these ways to support us. We'll see everybody on Friday.
What? Okay.
Thank you much.
Thank you.